we're heading towards a civil war. I don't think there's any doubt. We looked at the indices out there, and these are unbridgeable divides right now and getting deeper. And the Democratic Party is getting more and more radical. Look, everything we're dealing with right now is about illegal aliens, whether it's they want to spend $1 trillion on their health care, whether they're demanding a census that counts them for congressional races and for electoral college, whether it's the mass deportations that we're trying to get done in Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles. Everything's, if they don't have illegal aliens, if they don't have a foreign entity in here and folks in here, they don't have there's no way for them to put together the votes. They love democracy, but it's just the math doesn't work. You saw the Supreme Court today. You see these redistricting fights, and the redistricting fights are kind of like the kids in this chat room. If we had enough stones and urgency and maximalization strategy, the 21 would already be up on the table, right? We'd be now executing how you do it. We have to do a whole fight about that. So the establishment, because they come up in this paradigm where the established order controls everything, and they want to be part of the established order. And we see that we got here, we've gotten here over 40 or 50 years, and we've won enough times as Republicans, the House, the Senate, the presidency. The country's basically on a cliff of an abyss, and if it hadn't been for Trump, with all his imperfections, the country would be over. So it's just going to get worse. We're going to always have, like this thing in Kansas, where they're going to throw, people under the bus immediately and cower and be supplicants and ask for forgiveness for people who are not worthy of us asking for forgiveness. And the fight is going to get more intense. The left is going to get more radical. They're going to go up more the escalatory ladder. Look, Mangini's a hero to them. You got to face and Mondami. He's a Marxist jihadist that's going to win, I don't know, by 15 points or so in New York City. Sadiq Khan. Everything they have is even more radical than you can anticipate. It's getting worse every day. They're not being resolved. There's nothing, and it's really nothing to debate. We have this chasm, and to me, it's the issue I have is that the Trump administration and Pam Bondi and the crew are not moving quickly enough. They had a thing today in the Oval, which was great, about stopping, violence in the streets. That's great, and I appreciate that. But we have to focus on the deep state. We have to focus on taking this apparatus. We only have a short window of time, I think, to be able to do this, and we're not prioritizing it, and we're not hiring enough U.S. attorneys to focus on it, and we're not getting that. If we don't get that done, these statistics we're putting out and the great job at Cash and people and Dan Bon Jr. are doing about arresting bad guys is not going to matter, because you're going to have more bad guys later invited back in by these people. So now it's time to, I think, maximize our own strategy, seize the institutions, and move with a sense of urgency.
Can you give a couple examples of what you think DOJ should be doing right now?
Well, first off, I think DOJ, we got attorneys. I think we got to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the election. You have to go back to January 6th. Look at Nancy Pelosi. There's a young reporter, Allison Steinberg, over at Lindell TV. She asked Nancy Pelosi a question today about January 6th and about the National Guard, and Nancy Pelosi turned around, screamed at her from a few feet away, "Shut up. How can you ask that?" They're so sensitive about January 6th, so you got to go back to the stolen election of 2020. You've got to go back to January 6th. You have to take the whole continuum. You have to go back to the whole thing on Crossfire Hurricane. You have to adjudicate everything they did, and we have to do it in public. Even throwing the pandemic in there, and the response, the summer of love, all of it. If to keep this republic and keep it as a constitutional republic, we have to be fair about this. We have to be transparent about it. We have to adjudicate it by the rule of law, but it has to be done. And you see, we're making some progress. You got Comey with a couple of charges on appetizer, John Bolton, maybe with a couple, Letitia James, but it's not good enough and it's not fast enough. And the only way we're going to solve this is U.S. attorneys. I think we're 25 or 30 short is what I'm hearing. There's just some sort of backlog. And you can't depend on a Halligan coming out of nowhere and being able to drop a couple right away. We have to take apart the deep state. We have to do it now in every aspect that's happened over the last couple of years. At Charlie's, I know you were at the Student Action Summit down at Tampa. And normally, you know me, I'm running out there, we're at war, and I'm dropping the mic and running around like a madman. I told Charlie before, I said, this is going to be very different. I said, I'm going to go out with what I call the Tampa Resolves. And it is, we have to prioritize everything else we're working on It has to be to go after the deep state. That combination of national security, intelligence, law enforcement, the Pentagon, its interconnections with Wall Street and big tech, that we have to do that. If we don't go after that and do it now with a sense of urgency, we're never going to have another shot. This is the time we have to do it. We have to make it a priority. And I said, you're going to find out something. That's the third resolve I said was, no, do it now, do it with urgency. And the third was, who's ever not with us is against us. This is the best way we can unmask everybody, because this is not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be easy. You and I are called, you're called more names than I am, but we were both, by the Tel Aviv Levin crowd, we're called everything, right? They're going to do more of that because the deep state is also connected with certain of our allies. You have to go do this, and you have to do it. It's not going to be pleasant. You're going to get thrown out of your country club maybe, but if you're going to save the republic, we have to do this now. And a part of that, you're going to see if you do that, the escalating political violence of the more and more radical left, and quite frankly, more and more of the central apparatus of the Democratic Party is going to be gutted. And that's why I think, President Trump, I know, wants to focus. Todd Blanche talked about it today in the Oval Office. It has to happen. And it's only going to happen, I think, if people like you and myself and some others keep saying, hey, guys, I understand you got 1,000 things you're working on, but we have to start to rank order priorities. And this has to be the priority right now for President Trump.
I mean, there are so many places you could start, but it seems obvious that you would start with the FBI. And we now know it's confirmed that there were hundreds of plainclothes FBI agents in the crowd on January 6th. So that changes. That's not crowd control. That's political subversion. And it kind of confirms what a lot of people have been saying for a number of years now, that there was a fake element to that. There were a lot of sincere people protesting what they thought was the theft of the election, but there were also clearly agitators in the crowd. It was a setup to some extent. Obviously, hundreds of plainclothes FBI agents. And, I almost got fired for saying that a couple of years ago. It was obvious to me, but now we know it's true. In fact, it's worse than we thought it was. How many FBI officials have been fired for that?
No, I mean, you continue to ask how many have been let go. I think a handful. I don't know. It hasn't been enough to register with any type of head count that OMB is doing or
Right.
budget. The budget increase. Look, I love Cash and I love Dan Bongino. Cash is like a brother to me. But they're two guys hanging on by their fingernails. The same with Pam and Todd. This is why I say the official inside the U.S. Attorney, main justice, you need about another 25 or 30 of these prosecutors. You got to get on with it. The FBI, look, I for a long time have said, I think we got to bifurcate. It's too big, too complicated, covers too much stuff. Like the counterterrorism, you got to bifurcate it. I think you put the counterterrorism, first off, you downsize it and you put it in the intelligence part over DHS, and you have a reorganization of that. This is law enforcement. I'll be tied to U.S. attorneys. We ought to have a much smaller federal police force, which this is. It ought to have a much tighter mandate. We have to have much more control because, look, the scandal of the FBI is twofold. Number one is what they did, and the mentality and the organizing principles inside the FBI that made it that you would do it, and it was career enhancing to do it. In fact, you would not think of not doing it. The whistleblowers were a handful. I mean, I'd sit on the war room every day and say, hey, look, you're not going to be able to use the SS excuse that, hey, I was just following orders. We've only had a handful of whistleblowers. And we know from the other day of even getting this information you're talking about and others talking about came from, it's not that Dan and Cash admit, we don't control it. We didn't get the information. This came through a whistleblower. This came through some person that was afraid of getting wrapped up in this. But the FBI to me should be downsized by 2/3. First off, by splitting it up and then going through, because remember the second part of the scandal, and maybe the more important, is that Ray bald-faced lied to people for years and years and years. And the oversight, it just kind of went over the oversight. If we hadn't won and come back from nowhere, because they never thought we were coming back, right? That's one of the reasons they were so blatant. We wouldn't know any of this today because Congress didn't perform its functions. And I might add that this was a Republican administration. It was President Trump's administration, and we can kind of control for a moment the apparatus of which they lied to us, and there was no follow-up on the oversight. It's just, okay, so Ray was able to kind of worm out of it. It's so deep. It requires, to me, you have to go in with a trenching tool and dig them out. And we got to have cash in Dan's back to do that. We're not doing it right now. And you can't depend upon just a random whistleblower to have a act of conscience, right? You can't depend upon the kindness of others. We have to do this, and it's going to be unpleasant. And the New York Times is going to say you're a bunch of fascists, and the New Yorker is going to say terrible things about you. But hey, who cares? We're trying to save our country right now. And now we've won everything. If we don't take advantage of every frickin' moment because we're burning daylight, this is going to pass. There's going to be all kind of other issues come up, and we're just going to go, okay, let's go have another election. It's not enough.
We've already wasted months and months and months on this Iran, Qatar insanity, totally unrelated to the insanity. But also you sort of wonder, like, what's the cost? Not just the financial cost, but the cost in attention and priority.
The opportunity cost.
But
huge.
What is this impulse? You've been in Republican politics really at the center of it for so long, where Republicans seem to spend most of their time policing, the leaders policing their members and their voters. Like, what is that?
It's the abused spouse syndrome or whatever. By the way, the policing is immediate and constant, right? And almost like Cromwell. I mean, the policing is immediate, and there's no discussion about how this happened or whatever. But for the left, you let them get away with the most egregious crime, and they know that. They know that institutionally the party is weak. Because the party's not a party of government, obviously, of individuals, but it's attracted, and you know this better than anybody, just people who kind of want to get along, who want to have people not say bad things about them, and the way to do that is just to go along. And if we can make some changes on the margin, it would work. If that strategy worked, the country wouldn't be on the edge of the abyss. Even with Trump, we are on the edge of the abyss. And people, and many people waking up, the MAGA base knows it. They got the pitchforks. They're ready to roll. In fact, every day when I do the show, they're blowing me up of, hey, why are we not doing more about the deep state? Why are we not naming names? Why are people out there? Which is great. So we have a voting base of blue collar and middle class people who are saying we've had a belly full of this and we want action, right? And you have still a political apparatus that continues to say, because even Dan Bongino, those guys are police. Look when our people go up to Capitol Hill. They get as tough a grilling by the Republicans oftentimes as they do the Democrats. The Democrats are so over the top; it's insane. But there's still the correction police, the be politically correct is still there, and still the mentality of it. The only way we're going to do that is to just take action and get some scalps. And that's why I think you're starting to see through some of these indictments, maybe Bolton, but it's not enough, and you're not getting to the central apparatus part, which we have to get to.
I mean, a lot of the political consultants at highest level Republican political consultants seem very consumed with knocking off Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massie. You don't have to agree with everything those people are calling for, but you can't say they're liberal. They're not liberal. I mean, Massey's kind of a libertarian, but he's a lot more conservative than, I don't know, Lindsey Graham or Mike Lawler by any measure. And yet they seem like they're spending 80% of their day trying to find a primary challenger for Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, what is that? It almost seems like subversion to me. They're so
tied to the Israel First money. This is they're trying to crush Massey out in. And Massey's not perfect. Right, MTG. I'm very close to MTG. She's not perfect. She flipped and went with McCarthy, but she's a firebrand and she's a fighter. And when a fight counts, she's going to be there with you.
Well, and they're both sincere. That's the thing. That's. Look, I don't agree with everything. I do agree with everything Marjorie says, but I don't agree with everything Massey says. But he's totally sincere. He's not getting paid to say these things. He means it. And isn't that who you want on your side?
They don't. Look, Luntz and these guys, remember, if you look back up at Capitol Hill, and I know you know the math here, we only have a handful of MAGA people, right? Yeah. If you look in the Senate, we got maybe Eric Schmidt, maybe Josh Hawley, both from Missouri. In the House, we got a handful. And because they look at Trump as a passing summer storm. It could be bad, but it's going to pass. And this is why I'm saying we have to have a sense of urgency. We're burning daylight. They just hope to tap President Trump along, and they'll get to midterms, and then 2028, and they'll just Ted Cruz already had a big article in the the Daily Telegraph, he's already putting his team together. I know it's totally random. It's totally random from your interview, and that Israel First has to have a candidate since they just got crushed here in the last couple of days. But it is because certain vested interests want people to kind of kowtow to a line, right? And if you fall outside that, they're going to come after you. And I think that's why it behooves us. Look, Fox just had the first interview, I think with Dominic, right? He gets on there, 6 minutes. They got a big debate tomorrow night. The only question was about Gaza and Israel. They're asking this guy, with everything else going on, and quite frankly, how he's a Marxist jihadist, but he has kind of taken populism and talked about affordability. You think you might want to get in back of the Working Families Party and DSA and how they replicate the Trump, turning point, war room, precinct strategy for ground game for low information, low propensity voters. And this is why they're blowing guys out, because they had no money at first against Cuomo. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about arresting Bibi Netanyahu. You haven't given Trump credit. And what do you think about the Gaza peace? Literally 5 minutes, the first interview, 5 minutes, all about Israel. This is just this obsession with it. And when I gave that keynote speech to kind of wrap up the National Conservatism Conference, which is kind of got a strong neocon, take on it, I said, to quote T.E. Lawrence from the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, what they told him at the time when he showed up at Cairo's military headquarters, they said, look, the Middle East is a sideshow to the main event, the Western Front. And
that's right. The
Arab Revolt is a sideshow to a sideshow. And I said, the Middle East right now for us, with everything geopolitically going on and the economic war with China and our nation sliding toward a civil war around insurrection with a party like the Democrats have an escalatory ladder of violence. The Middle East is a sideshow, and the Israel issue is a sideshow to a sideshow. That's full stop. And you can't let it be the central thing that you revolve around. And I'm a supporter of Israel, and I'm a supporter of the Jewish people. But the Israel First aspect of this has taken our eye so far off the ball, because they kept saying it's going to tear MAGA apart. It's not going to tear MAGA apart because it's not a big enough fundamental issue to tear us apart. And that's why we have to focus on the time that we have to really take down the central thing that President Trump will be known for. One will be some of this peace on the Eurasian landmass, etc. But the central thing, if he can accomplish it, and we must accomplish it on his tour of duty, is the deconstruction of the administrative state and the destruction of the deep state.
If you enjoyed today's video on Anonymous Official, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching and sticking with us.